ruthless and cunning, Lucian Romano needed a respectable wife to secure his Mafia throne. Brilliant, plus-sized accountant Matilda Brooks just wanted to survive after uncovering his illicit ledger. Forced into a fake marriage to fool his deadly rivals, this unlikely bride quickly became the only truth in his dark world. The underworld of New York City was not run by men with guns in dark alleyways. It was run by men in bespoke Brioni suits, sitting in glass boardrooms. Lucian Romano was the apex predator of this world. At 32, he was the newly minted of the Romano Syndicate, a sprawling empire that controlled everything from the shipping ports of New Jersey to high-end real estate in Manhattan. But Lucian had a problem. The old guard of the Cosa Nostra, specifically the traditionalist capo di tutti capi, Don Alberto Rizzoli, viewed Lucian as a volatile wild card. Lucian was unmarried, ruthless, and lacked the family man image that the traditional Italian commission demanded of a leader. Worse still, Lucian's primary rival, Giovanni Rossi, was actively lobbying the commission to strip Lucian of his territories, claiming Lucian's reckless bachelor lifestyle was bringing too much federal heat on their operations. Don Rizzoli had given Lucian an ultimatum: settle down, marry a respectable woman, and prove he was a man of stability, or lose his seat at the table. Lucian needed a wife. But bringing a supermodel or a shallow socialite to the altar would only insult Rizzoli's intelligence. He needed someone who looked real, someone grounded, intelligent, and entirely untethered from the Mafia world. He just didn't expect to find her at the end of a loaded gun. Matilda Brooks was a senior forensic accountant at Osprey Financial Group. She was 30 years old, fiercely intelligent, and physically defied the conventional standards of corporate beauty. Matilda was fat, a word she had long ago stripped of its power to hurt her. She had a heavy-set frame, soft, pronounced curves, and a round face framed by thick, dark waves of hair. She dressed impeccably, hiding behind sharp blazers and bold confidence. Yet she knew how the world saw her. Invisible, unthreatening, and easily ignored, that invisibility was precisely what made her so brilliant at her job. People overlooked her. And because they overlooked her, she saw everything. Late one Tuesday evening, while auditing the accounts for a shell company called Apex Logistics, Matilda found a ghost in the machine. It wasn't a glaring error. It was a microscopic fraction of a percentage, a rounding anomaly hidden within millions of daily transactions. Over 3 weeks, she pulled at the thread until the entire sweater unraveled. She had accidentally traced $40 million of illicit drug money directly back to Lucian Romano's personal holding firm. She didn't go to the police. Matilda was smart enough to know that the NYPD was likely on the Romano payroll. Instead, she backed up the data on a secure drive, fully intending to disappear. She just wasn't fast enough. On a rainy Thursday night, as she walked to her apartment in Queens, a black SUV pulled up onto the curb. 2 men stepped out. 5 minutes later, Matilda was sitting in a dimly lit, soundproofed office in the back of a high-end Brooklyn restaurant, staring across a mahogany desk at Lucian Romano. Lucian leaned back in his leather chair, swirling a glass of amber whiskey. His dark, calculating eyes studied her. He expected a trembling, crying civilian. Instead, Matilda sat upright, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her breathing controlled, though her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Matilda Brooks," Lucian murmured, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that commanded the room. "My men tell me you've been digging in my garden." "I was doing an audit, Mr. Romano," Matilda said, her voice remarkably steady. "I didn't choose the garden. The weeds were just too obvious to ignore." Lucian's right-hand man, Dante Russo, shifted aggressively, his hand hovering over his holster. Lucian held up a single finger, silencing him without a glance. "You found 40 million, Lucian said, genuinely amused. "My best men spent 6 months burying that money. You found it in 3 weeks. And what exactly were you planning to do with this information?" "Nothing," Matilda replied, meeting his gaze. "I have a flash drive with the encrypted ledger in a safety deposit box. If I don't check in with a specific IP address every 48 hours, the file goes to the FBI, the IRS, and every major news outlet in the state. I don't want your money, Mr. Romano. I just want to live." Lucian stared at her. He took in her full figure, her defiant posture, the sharp intelligence burning in her brown eyes. She wasn't a standard beauty queen. She was real. She was substantial. She was brilliant. Suddenly, the pieces of his own puzzle snapped into place. "You have a sister?" Lucian said softly, shifting tactics. "Evelyn. She's at Mount Sinai, awaiting a kidney transplant, dialysis 3 times a week. Medical bills are piling up. Your insurance is tapped out. You owe about $2.4 million. Matilda's stoic facade cracked. The color drained from her cheeks. "Leave her out of this." "I'm not threatening her, Matilda," Lucian said, leaning forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "I'm offering you a job, a very specific, highly compensated role." Matilda frowned, confusion replacing her fear. "What kind of job?" "I need a wife," Lucian said bluntly. Matilda let out a short, incredulous laugh before she could stop herself. "You're joking. You are the head of the Romano family. You could have your pick of any heiress or model in Manhattan. You don't need to kidnap an accountant for a date." "I don't need a model," Lucian snapped, his tone darkening. "My rivals think I am frivolous. They think I am a playboy, incapable of leading this syndicate. The commission demands a traditional, grounded family man. If I marry a 22-year socialite, they will see right through it. But if I marry a brilliant, sensible, fiercely loyal woman, a woman who possesses the intellect to outsmart my own financial advisors, they will respect it. They will believe it." He stood up, walking slowly around the desk until he was standing in front of her. "Here is the deal, Matilda. You marry me. We sign a contract for 2 years. You stand by my side. You play the devoted wife. And you smile for the cameras and the dons. In exchange, I clear Evelyn's medical debt completely. I get her moved to the top of the private donor list. When the 2 years are up, we divorce quietly. And you walk away with $10 million and your life. Matilda looked up at him. She was acutely aware of her own body, of how out of place she felt in his world of tailored danger. Why me, aside from the blackmail? Look at me, Mr. Romano. Your world is built on vanity. They will eat me alive. Luciane reached down, gently tilting her chin up, so she was forced to look into his dark eyes. My world is built on power, Matilda, and right now, you are holding $40 million of it over my head. You are exactly what I need. Do we have a deal? Matilda thought of Evelyn, frail and hooked to machines. She thought of her own empty bank account. She took a deep breath, steeling her spine. We have a deal, Lucian, but under one condition. Lucian raised an eyebrow. Name it. I am a fake wife, not a submissive one. If I do this, I do it my way. You don't hide me, and you don't apologize for me. A slow, genuine smile spread across the Mafia boss's face. I wouldn't dream of it, mia sposa. The transformation of Matilda Brooks was not a cliché makeover. Lucian didn't demand she lose a single ounce. Instead, he demanded the world adjust to her. He brought in the finest bespoke tailors from Milan. For the first time in her life, Matilda was dressed in clothing engineered precisely for her body. Rich emerald silks, tailored ivory pantsuits, and deep crimson gowns that accentuated her curves and gave her an aura of untouchable royalty. The engagement shocked the New York elite. The tabloids went wild, and the underworld went quiet with confusion. Giovanni Rossi, Luciane's rival, was reportedly furious, unable to find a single scandalous thread in Matilda's pristine background. To the commission, she was a respectable, highly educated professional, a clear signal that Lucian Romano was finally growing up. Their wedding was a spectacle of power, held at a heavily guarded private estate in the Hamptons. 300 of the most dangerous people on the East Coast were in attendance, masking their ruthless natures behind designer tuxedos and polite smiles. Matilda stood in the bridal suite, staring at her reflection. She wore a custom-made A-line gown of heavy ivory satin with intricate lace sleeves. She looked beautiful. She looked formidable. You look like a queen, a voice said. She turned to see Lucian standing in the doorway. He was breathless for a fraction of a second, a flicker of genuine admiration crossing his usually unreadable face. He offered his arm. Ready to face the wolves? I brought the leash. Matilda replied smoothly, slipping her arm through his. The ceremony was a blur of Latin vow and flashing cameras, but the reception was where the real war began. The grand ballroom was dripping in crystal and white roses. As Lucian led Matilda through the crowd, she could hear the whispers. She saw the manicured hands of the mob wives covering their mouths, their eyes raking over her full figure with thinly veiled disdain. I don't understand it, hissed a blonde woman, dripping in diamonds, standing near the champagne tower. Look at her size. What is Lucian doing? He could have anyone, and he chooses a woman who looks like she eats the help. Matilda stiffened, the old insecurities threatening to rise up and choke her. But before she could pull away, Lucian's grip on her waist tightened. He steered them directly toward the whispering woman. The crowd parted for the Don. "Isabella," Lucian said, his voice cold enough to freeze the champagne. The blonde woman blanched, dropping her gaze. "I don't believe you've properly congratulated my wife." "Tia, congratulations, Mrs. Romano," Isabella stammered. Lucian didn't break eye contact with the terrified woman. "Matilda possesses a mind that could dismantle your husband's entire operation before breakfast. I chose a partner, Isabella, not a hood ornament. I suggest you remember the difference." He guided Matilda away, leaving a stunned silence in their wake. Matilda looked at him, her heart doing a strange, entirely unscripted flutter. "You didn't have to do that," she murmured. "You are a Romano now," Lucian said fiercely, his hand resting warmly on the small of her back. "No one disrespects you. Not in my house." But the shallow insults of the Mafia wives were the least of their worries. As the night wore on, Lucian was summoned to the head table to drink a traditional toast with Don Alberto Rizzoli and the other bosses. It was a sign of ultimate acceptance. Giovanni Rossi was there, smiling a little too widely, offering a rare vintage bottle of Italian red wine for the toast. Matilda stood a few paces behind Lucian's chair, observing the room. Her mind, wired to detect anomalies and patterns, was on high alert. She watched Giovanni Rossi. She watched the waiter who poured the wine. The waiter's hands were steady, but a bead of sweat rolled down his temple. He poured the wine for Don Rizzoli, then for Rossi, and finally for Lucian. But Matilda's sharp eyes caught it. The waiter's thumb briefly flicked over the rim of Lucian's glass, depressing a tiny, flesh-colored sponge hidden beneath his fingernail. A single, imperceptible drop of clear liquid slid down the inside of the crystal. Lucian raised his glass, preparing to lock eyes with Rizzoli and seal his absolute power over the syndicate. "Lucian, wait." Matilda's voice cut through the heavy silence of the VIP table. She didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, deliberately catching her heel on the thick Persian rug. With a fabricated cry of alarm, she lunged forward, her hand violently colliding with Lucian's arm. The crystal wine glass shattered against the marble floor, the dark red liquid splashing across the polished stone and onto Giovanni Rossi's expensive shoes. The room erupted into chaos. Dante Russo and half a dozen guards had their weapons half drawn before Lucian raised his hand, halting them. "Matilda?" Lucian asked, alarmed, catching her by the waist to steady her. "I'm so sorry." Matilda gasped, playing the embarrassed, clumsy bride perfectly. She looked at Don Rizzoli. "My heel caught the rug. I am so incredibly sorry to interrupt the toast." Giovanni Rossi sneered, wiping at his trousers. "Perhaps the new bride is a bit too heavy on her feet, Lucian. She lacks grace." Lucian's eyes flashed with lethal intent, but Matilda squeezed his wrist, stepping close to him, while apologizing profusely to the table. She leaned into Lucian's ear, pressing her lips against his jawline, as if whispering a sweet nothing. The waiter with the scar over his left eyebrow, she whispered, her voice barely a breath. He dropped something from his fingernail into your glass. Don't let him leave. Lucian's body went completely rigid. The affection in his eyes was instantly replaced by the cold, calculating stare of a killer. He looked down at the spilled wine on the marble. Where the liquid pooled, microscopic bubbles were beginning to form, lightly etching the stone. Acid. Ricin. Something fatal. He looked back at his bride. The woman he had bought to be a prop had just saved his life in a room full of apex predators without breaking her cover for a second. Lucian smiled, a terrifying, beautiful smile, and kissed Matilda deeply in front of the entire commission. Do not apologize, my love, he said loudly before turning his gaze to Dante Russo, giving him a barely perceptible nod toward the fleeing waiter. You have perfect timing. As Dante slipped out of the room to hunt down the assassin, Lucian pulled Matilda against his chest. For the first time in his life, the impenetrable Mafia boss realized he was holding a woman he could actually trust. And in his world, trust was far more dangerous than love. The aftermath of the wedding reception was a masterclass in controlled chaos. Behind the heavy oak doors of the Romano estate, the polite veneer of the celebration instantly dissolved into the brutal reality of syndicate warfare. Dante Russo had successfully dragged the terrified waiter into the underground holding cells beneath the property before the man could flee the grounds. The confession extracted with ruthless efficiency confirmed everything Matilda had suspected. Giovanni Rossi had paid the man $500,000 to slip a fast-acting, untraceable neurotoxin into Lucian's glass. While Lucian and his lieutenants managed the immediate fallout in the war room, Matilda was escorted to the master suite. The sprawling room was a fortress of marble and bulletproof glass, overlooking the dark, rolling waves of the Atlantic Ocean. She stood by the window, still wearing her heavy ivory satin gown, listening to the muffled shouts echoing from the floors below. She was entirely out of her depth, thrust into a world where a misplaced heel was the only thing standing between life and death. Yet, as she stared at her reflection in the dark glass, she did not feel fear. She felt an overwhelming sense of clarity. Hours later, the heavy bedroom door finally clicked open. Lucian stepped inside. He looked exhausted, the sharp lines of his face drawn tight with tension. He had discarded his tuxedo jacket, and his silk shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the faint edge of a dark tattoo on his chest. He stopped in the center of the room, his dark eyes locking onto Matilda. The formidable, untouchable Mafia boss suddenly looked remarkably human, anchored only by the presence of the woman standing before him. Rossi will deny it, Lucian said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. The waiter will disappear, and Rossi will claim absolute ignorance to the commission. But the line has been crossed. This is no longer a political dispute. It is a war. Matilda turned away from the window, her hands folding neatly in front of her. Then you need to strike him where he cannot defend himself. Not with guns, Lucian, with numbers. Lucian slowly closed the distance between them, his gaze dropping to her lips before rising back to her eyes. You saved my life tonight, Matilda. You risked your own cover. You risked the wrath of the Commission, and you humiliated yourself to protect me. Why? Because we have a contract, she replied, her voice trembling slightly, as his proximity sent a sudden electric warmth flushing through her chest. And I happen to be very strict about my professional agreements. A slow, devastating smile broke through the hardened mask of Lucian's face. He reached out, his large, calloused hands gently rest on her waist, pulling her flush against his chest. Matilda gasped softly, acutely aware of her own softness pressed against the rigid, muscular plane of his body. She was so entirely unaccustomed to being touched, let alone desired, that her instinct was to pull away, to hide her heavy curves from his intense scrutiny. But Lucian's grip was firm, anchoring her in place. "You are magnificent," he whispered, his breath ghosting over her ear. "The women in my world are empty vessels, concerned only with vanity and survival. But you, Matilda, you are a queen holding a ledger. You see everything they try to hide." He stepped back just enough to look at her, his expression turning deeply serious. "From this moment forward, you are no longer just my wife in name. You are my partner. Dante will give you full, unrestricted access to the entire Romano financial network, legitimate and illegitimate. I want you to find Giovanni Rossi's money. I want you to find where he hides it, how he cleans it, and who he pays. You are going to bleed him dry before I ever fire a single bullet." Over the next 3 months, the Romano estate transformed into Matilda's personal battlefield. The Grand Library was converted into a state-of-the-art command center, surrounded by towering monitors and mountains of encrypted hard drives. Matilda worked relentlessly. She was brilliant, tearing through Rossi's complex web of offshore accounts, shell corporations, and corrupt shipping manifests with surgical precision. And as she dismantled Rossi's empire piece by piece, the dynamic between Matilda and Lucian profoundly shifted. The fake marriage became intensely, undeniably real behind closed doors. Lucian was fiercely protective, refusing to let her leave the compound without a heavily armed motorcade. But he was also entirely captivated by her mind and her body. He worshipped her softness, spending long nights tracing the curves of her hips and reminding her that she was the most beautiful creature he had ever possessed. For the first time in her life, Matilda did not feel invisible. She felt powerful. She felt loved. But a cornered animal is always the most dangerous, and Giovanni Rossi was rapidly running out of places to hide. The retaliation came on a freezing Tuesday morning in November. Matilda had finally found the holy grail of Rossi's operation, a massive centralized account in the Cayman Islands that held the entirety of his syndicate's liquid assets, nearly $300 million. She had meticulously bypassed the security protocols, and was preparing to execute a massive digital wire transfer that would permanently drain Rossi's accounts, dispersing the funds into hundreds of untraceable micro-charities across the globe. Lucian was standing behind her chair in the library, his hand resting warmly on her shoulder as she prepared to hit the final keystroke. But before her finger could touch the key, Dante Russo burst through the heavy mahogany doors, his face pale and his gun drawn. "Lucian!" Dante barked, his voice tight with panic. "It's Rossi. He's bypassing the compound completely." He sent a heavily armed hit squad to Mount Sinai Hospital. They are on Evelyn's floor. Matilda's blood turned to absolute ice. The world around her seemed to violently stop spinning. Her sweet, fragile sister, currently tethered to a dialysis machine, completely defenseless. Rossi knew he couldn't penetrate the Romano fortress, so he had gone after the only leverage he had left. "How many men?" Lucian demanded, instantly shifting into a terrifying state of lethal calm. He drew his weapon, checking the magazine with practiced efficiency. 12, Dante replied. "Mercenaries, heavy artillery. Our hospital guards are pinned down in the East Wing stairwell." "Get the helicopters," Lucian ordered. He turned to Matilda, his dark eyes fierce and uncompromising. "Do not leave this room. Do not stop working. Drain his accounts right now, Matilda. I will bring Evelyn back to you. I swear it on my life." As Lucian and his tactical team took to the skies, Matilda was left alone in the sprawling library, the deafening silence pressing in on her. Her hands were shaking violently as they hovered over the keyboard. Her sister was in mortal danger, and the instinct to collapse into a panic attack was overwhelming. But then she remembered who she was. She was not just a terrified accountant from Queens anymore. She was Matilda Romano. With a guttural cry of pure, unadulterated rage, Matilda slammed her finger onto the enter key. The screen flashed a brilliant green. In a matter of seconds, $300 million vanished from Giovanni Rossi's control. But Matilda didn't stop there. Fueled by adrenaline and wrath, she accessed the dark web communications network she had uncovered during her audits. She sent an anonymous, encrypted mass broadcast to every cartel, supplier, and mercenary group on the eastern seaboard who did business with Rossi. The message was simple, accompanied by irrefutable digital proof. Giovanni Rossi is entirely bankrupt. He cannot pay you. His accounts are empty. The Romano family offers a $50 million bounty to whoever hands him over by midnight. She didn't just drain his bank accounts. She systematically destroyed his entire criminal infrastructure in less than 10 minutes. Across the city, at Mount Sinai Hospital, Lucian and Dante breached the 4th floor in a storm of tactical violence. The sterile white hallways were transformed into a chaotic war zone. But the battle was shockingly brief. Halfway through the firefight, the mercenary leader's encrypted radio buzzed with the frantic, terrified voice of Rossi's accountant screaming that the money was gone. Realizing they were bleeding for a ghost who could no longer pay them, the mercenaries threw down their weapons and surrendered immediately. Lucian found Evelyn, terrified, but entirely unharmed in her hospital bed, shielded by the bodies of 2 Romano guards who had held the line. That evening, the Romano estate was eerily quiet. Giovanni Rossi was dead, handed over to Dante Russo by his own betrayed lieutenants just hours after Matilda's broadcast. The rival faction had completely collapsed, and Don Alberto Rizzoli had personally called Lucian to declare the Romano family the undisputed absolute power of the commission. Matilda was sitting on the edge of the sprawling king-sized bed, staring blankly at the roaring fireplace. The adrenaline had finally faded, leaving her entirely exhausted. The bedroom door opened, and Lucian stepped inside. He was covered in soot, his clothes torn, and a small cut bled freely above his eyebrow. But his eyes were blazing with an intense, burning devotion. I didn't say a word. He walked directly to a small steel safe embedded in the wall, spun the dial, and pulled out a thick manila folder. It was their marriage contract, the 2-year agreement. Lucian walked over to the fireplace, placed it, without a single moment of hesitation, tossed the folder into the roaring flames. They stood together in silence, watching the thick paper curl, blacken, and turn to ash, completely destroying the lie that had brought them together. Lucian turned to her, dropping to his knees on the plush carpet in front of her. He gently took her trembling hands in his, pressing his lips to her knuckles. "There is no contract," Lucian whispered, his voice thick with raw, unfiltered emotion. "There is no timeline. There is only you, Matilda. You are my empire. You are my heart. I do not want a fake bride. I want my wife forever." Matilda looked down into the eyes of the ruthless Mafia boss, tears finally spilling over her lashes and tracking down her cheeks. She slid off the edge of the bed, dropping to her knees on the floor in front of him. She wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face into his chest, inhaling the scent of smoke, rain, and the man who had loved her exactly as she was, forever. Matilda cried softly, holding him impossibly tight. "I'm not going anywhere, Lucian." She had entered his world as a terrified hostage, holding a dangerous secret. She had worn fake rings, smiled for the cameras, and played the part of the obedient pawn. But in a world built on deception, bloodshed, and shadows, the brilliant, beautiful accountant had become the only truth the Mafia boss would ever need. Did you love this thrilling tale of loyalty, danger, and unexpected romance? If Matilda and Lucian's journey from a cold, fake contract to a genuine, unbreakable Mafia empire captured your heart, please hit that like button right now. Share this exciting video with your friends who love spicy, high-stakes romantic drama. Do not forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible real-life stories. Ring the notification bell so you never miss an upload. See you in the next video.